He said the file was closed, but my hand shook as I turned the key. My name is Helen, 52, and I've lived long enough to know that truth hides in the smallest folds of paper. The lawyer's envelope waited on the oak table, its cream surface catching a thin line of morning light. Before the shock came, there was warmth. The scent of fresh coffee, the soft hum of the kettle, the faint creak of our old house breathing in quiet rhythm. My husband, Mark, had always been steady, deliberate. I believed in that steadiness more than I believed in my own instincts. I stood by the kitchen counter, tracing the embossed return address with my thumb. My reflection in the window looked older than I felt. Just routine, I whispered to myself, but my pulse betrayed me. The warmth of home pressed around me, the ticking clock, the smell of toast, the sound of the mail slot closing. Familiar comforts, moments I once trusted to protect me. I promised myself I'd never keep secrets, that honesty was the one thing we still owned outright. That vow trembled now between my fingers. The envelope tore with a small sigh, paper fibers splitting like nerves. Inside, one letter, one folded birth certificate. My name nowhere, his name everywhere. The scent of ink rose sharp and chemical, stinging. My knees softened. I steadied myself on the table's edge, the wedding ring on my hand catching the same light that fell across the certificate. A woman's name I didn't recognize. A child's name I didn't dare speak aloud. I read the date, 16 years ago. My throat tightened. 16 years, and I never noticed the missing hours, the unexplained trips. The warmth of the room began to curdle. The clock above the mantel marked each second like a verdict. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a stage built for someone else's truth. I walked to the window, the morning sun harsh now, dissolving the illusion of safety. My neighbor waved from across the street. I lifted my hand out of habit, pretending nothing had changed. But the ring felt heavier. Every sound, the kettle cooling, the soft clink of the spoon in the sink, echoed with quiet betrayal. The air smelled of ink and regret. I whispered, "Why would you hide this from me, Mark?" The question wasn't meant for him. It was meant for the woman I used to be, the one who believed the law protected her because she worked within its walls, the one who thought a marriage certificate was proof enough of belonging. The paper in my hands said otherwise. I sat down, unfolded the letter, and began to read. It wasn't from him. It was from his lawyer, advising him on continuing child support arrangements, a polite phrase for deception, documented and approved. Each line carved away the life I thought I'd built. I could almost hear his voice in the careful phrasing, how he might have justified it. It was before us, he'd say. It didn't matter. But it did. It always would. Outside, the sunlight dimmed behind a cloud. Inside, the scent of coffee had gone cold, bitter. I folded the papers carefully, as though returning them might reverse what they'd done. My pulse thudded in my ears, steady and defiant. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, the sound too ordinary for what I'd just uncovered. I reached for the small brass key still lying beside the file. It glimmered faintly, the last piece of warmth I could stand to touch. I locked the drawer, placed the key on top, and whispered, "You said it was closed." My voice was calm, but it carried the tremor of a vow rewritten. The light shifted once more across the table, illuminating the words I could no longer unsee. The certificate, the signature, the lie that had slept beside me for 16 years. The child's surname was his. He looked exactly like my husband at 20. Same eyes, same tilt of the chin, the same unguarded way of standing, as if the world owed him nothing, and yet had already offered too much. For a moment, I thought I was seeing a ghost from an old photograph. But the chill that followed told me this was no memory. It was consequence. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, and behind him stood a woman holding a folder close to her chest, her badge half hidden beneath the fold of her coat. "Mrs. Hart?" she asked, her tone polite but formal. I nodded, though the name suddenly felt borrowed. "I'm with Family Welfare Services. We need to speak with your husband regarding a support case." "He isn't here," I said too quickly. "What kind of case?" The woman hesitated, the sound of a passing car filling the pause. The boy shifted, eyes darting to the side. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, steady, mechanical, like something refusing to stop despite what it knew. She opened the folder, revealing a photograph clipped to the top. The rustle of paper broke the quiet. "I'm afraid this concerns a paternity claim. We've received confirmation from the lab and require acknowledgement from Mr. Hart before proceeding further." The words didn't land all at once. They spread slowly, like a cold draft through a closed house. I reached for the edge of the door to steady myself. The photograph caught the light. His face, my husband's younger reflection in another life, smiled back at me through that boy's features. I said softly, "You have the wrong man." "I'm sorry," she replied, shaking her head. "The documentation is clear." "What's your name?" I asked the boy. He hesitated. "Daniel." That name folded into the silence of my living room. I could feel the air tighten. My husband had never mentioned a Daniel. Never. Yet here he stood, his existence notarized, stamped, and bound in a folder someone else had the right to carry. The social worker extended an envelope. "This is a formal notice for paternity proceedings. Court verification is scheduled in 2 weeks. We'll need his acknowledgement before then." 2 weeks. 14 days to confront 17 years of lies. The refrigerator clicked off. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stepped aside and said, "You can leave it on the table." My voice sounded rehearsed, as though I'd been expecting this visit. She placed the envelope neatly on the polished wood, thanked me, and nodded toward the boy. "You can wait in the car," she told him. He obeyed, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the tile. The sound followed him out, then stopped with the soft thud of the closing door. When we were alone, she said quietly, "I understand this must be difficult, but he's been providing support irregularly, and the court requires clarification before the next review." "How long?" I asked. "Since 2009, she replied. "Payments under a confidential arrangement. The child's mother recently passed away." The words bent the air between us. I didn't realize I'd gripped the back of the chair until the wood pressed against my palm. "So now it's my responsibility," I murmured. "No, Mrs. Hart," she said gently. "Just his acknowledgement. We'll handle the rest." She closed her folder and stepped out. The door shut with a soft click, leaving the house too still, too aware. The envelope sat untouched on the table, a small square of law waiting to rewrite a marriage. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. Proof had already walked through my door wearing my husband's face. The ticking clock started again, louder now. I could hear my pulse keeping time with it. I wanted to scream, to demand the universe explain how betrayal could be so calm, so procedural. Instead, I whispered to no one, "I should have known when the trips got longer, when he started locking drawers." Outside, the late afternoon light slanted through the curtains, drawing lines across the table. The envelope's edges caught it, glowing faintly, as if it knew it held something living inside. I sank into the nearest chair, my hand trembling near the envelope, but never touching it. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine started. Hers, leaving. I waited for the silence to settle again. It did, heavy and patient. Then from outside, a voice called faintly through the half-open window. Young, uncertain, but close enough to carry. "Goodbye, Mom." The word shattered the quiet. He called me by her name. He lied even when silence was safer. That thought repeated like a warning I should have heard years ago. The night pressed close, the air thick with the kind of quiet that made secrets louder. The glow from his work phone cut across the ceiling, a pulse of cold light that refused to die even after midnight. He'd told me it was locked for company use only, that privacy was policy, but trust had already expired. I just hadn't signed the notice yet. The phone blinked. Again. One new message. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a terrible certainty. I shouldn't have known the password. Yet I did. It was our anniversary date, irony carved into numbers. The screen came alive with threads of conversation, names, places, receipts, the kind of words that didn't need explanation anymore. Checking in, same hotel. Will she be there? Not tonight. I told her I'm working late. Each message was a blade. The light reflected against the mirror beside the dresser, splitting my face into two halves, one that still remembered him, and one that finally didn't. I scrolled through months of exchanges, weekends marked as business trips, transfers in his name, room numbers. The proof sat there, time-stamped and unashamed. I took photos of every screen, the flash briefly lighting the walls like lightning before a storm. When I reached the folder labeled Archive, I found the one message that broke me. You promised to tell her after the holidays. Holidays. That was when we'd renewed our vows, when he'd slipped my ring back onto my finger with a look of devotion I now knew was rehearsed. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress felt colder than it should have. My breath fogged the mirror for a second before clearing, revealing that same half face staring back. How many lies did it take to make this real? I whispered. The silence gave no answer, only the slow tick of the wall clock counting my realization. The light from the phone dimmed. I pressed my thumb against the screen again, needing one more reason to hate him. Instead, I found an image file. Her face, younger, smiling. The reflection of his hand in the frame. I didn't recognize the background, but I could see his shadow in the corner, the shape of familiarity that turned my stomach. 3 words glowed beneath the image. See you soon. I closed my eyes, but the light remained behind my eyelids. A ghost I couldn't blink away. The room smelled faintly of him, his cologne, that dry cedar tone I used to love. It lingered in the fabric of the curtains, the collar of the shirt hanging on the chair. I stood up, opened the window, and let the night air sweep through. Cold, honest, cleansing. Downstairs, the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again, the same rhythm that had underscored our life together. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Clara from the legal office. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but calm. "I'm sorry it's late," I said. "Are you safe?" she asked immediately. "I don't know, but I found proof." She didn't need details. She'd seen this before, wives of men who hid truth behind polished shoes and client meetings. "Send everything to me," she said. "I'll cross-check the travel records." By the time I sent the files, my hands had stopped shaking. She messaged 10 minutes later, confirming what I already knew. Dates match exactly. Same hotels, every single trip. I stared at the phone in my lap, the dim screen still lighting the corner of the room. The mirror caught its reflection once more, a twin image of deception and discovery. I whispered, "Isolation isn't loneliness. It's clarity." Somewhere outside, a dog barked, and the house settled into uneasy quiet. I locked the phone, placed it on the table beside my ring, and watched the glow fade. For a moment, I thought about waking him, demanding answers, but the exhaustion was heavier than anger. Instead, I whispered one final vow to the empty room. "You built this wall, not me." Then I saw it, the last message at the bottom of the thread, one I hadn't noticed before. No timestamp, just words left waiting like an open wound. The last text read, "She knows." Truth hides best between numbers. I learned that long before I ever suspected him. The problem with numbers is they never lie. They just wait for you to learn how to read the truth, hiding in their quiet columns. The day started gray, the kind of overcast that turns even glass cold to the touch. I sat in the back of the small bank office while my contact, Margaret, scrolled through transaction records on her terminal. She'd worked there for years, long enough to know when a client was playing both sides of the truth. She didn't look at me when she whispered, "You didn't get this from me." The printer began its slow hum. Line by line, the ledger came to life. The paper felt dry beneath my fingers, its faint texture catching against my skin as if the truth resisted being held. I saw the first transfer, $1,200 every month, to an unfamiliar account marked Housing Support. Then a second line, $450 listed under Educational Fees. And then an $8,000 deposit annotated only as inheritance. He had always been meticulous with his money. I used to think it was discipline. Now I understood. It was strategy. Margaret hesitated before handing over the last sheet. "There's more," she said, "but I can't print without authorization." "I don't need all of it," I replied, "just enough to know what I'm living with." Her eyes softened, the kind that had seen too many people realizing their lives were built on forged balances. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Truth costs more than any currency." I folded the papers into my bag and left. The texture of the paper stayed under my fingertips, almost like static. As I walked through the lobby, the sound of the security scanner beeped softly, routine, indifferent. To everyone else, I was just another client. To me, I was a woman holding evidence of betrayal that could drown a marriage. Outside, the air smelled faintly metallic, rain threatening but undecided. I sat in my car and unfolded the first page again. Each figure became a confession written in ink. Don $200, $450, $8,000. They weren't numbers anymore. They were days stolen from my life, lies cached and cleared. I traced one entry where the ink had been pressed too hard, the digits slightly smudged. It felt rough, uneven. Maybe guilt makes a handshake even in writing. The bank's stamp at the bottom, reference ID BK97L1, made it official. Betrayal, verified and documented. I whispered to the empty car, "You bought silence with precision." The words tasted bitter, but necessary. When I reached home, the house was still. The clock in the hallway ticked with an exaggerated calm. I spread the sheets across the kitchen table like evidence in a private trial. I circled the recurring payments, made notes beside each one. He hadn't missed a single month in 4 years. That kind of commitment used to make me proud. Now it made me sick. I thought back to every conversation about budgets, every fight about expenses, how he'd told me not to worry, how he'd smiled through my questions. I saw the smirk now for what it was, a practiced form of control. The reflection in the kitchen window stared back at me, ghost-like. Behind me, the table was covered in paper trails of deceit. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. For a moment, I almost laughed. He used to joke that he could balance any account. I wondered if he'd ever considered the cost of losing me. I picked up the pen from the counter and began to tally, line by line, what his lies had cost us. Rent, school, inheritance. I added the numbers like a prayer I didn't want answered. $2,200 multiplied by 12 months, $14,400, plus $450 monthly for 4 years, another $21,600. Then the one-time inheritance of $8,000. The numbers formed a pattern of betrayal that couldn't be explained away. My pen trembled as I drew a line beneath them and wrote the total. The ink bled slightly through the paper, dark and final. $23,450, and still climbing. The figure stared back at me like an accusation, and in that moment I realized something cruel. Money wasn't his motive for secrecy. It was his method of control. Every dollar tied to another lie, another promise paid in installments. The rain finally started outside, soft at first, then heavier. It sounded like static through the glass, washing away the world I thought I knew. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the total, and whispered to the silence, "You can't edit a ledger without leaving fingerprints." The last drop of ink dried. The page curled slightly at the edges, rough beneath my hand. The total read $23,450, and still climbing. He fired the only person who could expose him. I should have expected it after the bank records, after the silence that followed every question I dared to ask. But betrayal always escalates. It never stays polite. The email came at 7:43 a.m. The subject line read, "Immediate termination." Beneath it, a single paragraph explaining that Clara had violated confidentiality and mishandled internal financial data. I could almost hear his voice behind the corporate phrasing, the smug rhythm he used when pretending righteousness. The sound of my computer fan filled the office, faint but constant, like the background noise of guilt trying to hide. I called her right away. Her voice cracked through the static. "They walked me out," she whispered. "Said I accessed restricted files. I didn't, I swear." "I know you didn't," I said. "He's covering his tracks." There was silence on the line for a few seconds before she asked, "You think he'll come after you next?" "He already has," I answered, though the words came out as a sigh. The sound of papers shifting echoed down the hallway, the admin filing away someone else's truth. I opened my window blinds halfway. The light that streamed in was thin, divided, fractured by dust. It reminded me of the way truth filtered through lies, visible, but only if you looked long enough. On my desk sat the HR memo, a formal copy sent to all senior staff. I unfolded it, listening to the faint rustle of paper that always preceded bad news. Every sentence was carefully constructed. After an internal review, failure to comply, maintaining ethical standards. I'd written language like that myself in another life, but this time it felt like a weapon disguised as policy. I scrolled through the archived reimbursements Clara had flagged before she was dismissed. 2 entries stood out, one marked as client hospitality for $1,800 and another under legal consultation for $4,600. Both signed off by him. The pattern was unmistakable. Money laundered through approval chains, every transaction a shadow of deceit. I printed the receipts and filed them in a plain folder labeled Reference 41B. The hum of the printer joined the soft rattle of the ceiling fan. I could hear footsteps outside my office. His rhythm. Slow, confident, pretending concern. He stopped by my door. "Rough morning, isn't it?" I didn't look up. "You fired the wrong person." "Really?" He chuckled, the sound sharp and practiced. "Clara breached data protocols," HR confirmed. "She asked questions," I said, finally meeting his gaze. "That's all she did." "Some questions can end careers," he replied smoothly. I felt the weight of his threat press against the room. For a second, I imagined every conversation we'd had, the tone, the smiles, the moments that had felt normal. All of it now seemed rehearsed. He leaned closer to my desk, voice low. "You're not thinking of following her example, are you?" "I'm thinking of boundaries," I said quietly, "ones that shouldn't have to be defended." He straightened, smirking. "Boundaries are flexible in this business." "Not mine," I answered. The fan above us buzzed, filling the silence that followed. He left without another word, the door clicking shut with mechanical finality. I exhaled slowly, letting the quiet settle again. The folder lay on my desk, its manila surface dull under the fractured light. I picked up my pen, its tip leaving faint grooves on the paper as I wrote a short summary for compliance. Employee termination. Potential retaliation pattern. Attach HR memo reference HR 22A. My handwriting wavered at first, then steadied. This was my line in the sand. Later that afternoon, I contacted a friend in the compliance department, a protector by nature, cautious but loyal. "I need this logged off record," I told her. She hesitated. "That's risky, even for me." "I know, but so is silence." The office emptied around 6 p.m., leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint whisper of window blinds shifting in the evening breeze. I stared at the empty cubicle where Clara used to sit, her mug still on the shelf, her desk phone disconnected. The absence was louder than any confrontation. I closed the blinds completely. Shadows filled the room, stretching long and uneven. Every lie he'd told had left a mark here, on the walls, in the air, in the sound of the building trying to breathe through it all. As I locked my desk drawer, the faint sound of my phone vibrated against the wood. A new email. Subject line, complaint notification. I opened it. It wasn't from Clara. It wasn't from HR. It was from him. He'd filed a formal complaint against me. They said I breached trust. I called it truth. That was how the hearing began. No kindness, no small talk, just accusation wrapped in policy. The conference room felt colder than usual, the air faintly sweet with varnish and dust. The scent clung to the wood panels like history itself was watching. 3 board members sat across from me, their folders aligned with perfect symmetry. Each wore the same expression, neutrality, pretending to be fairness. My file lay open in front of them, stamped and sealed, the ink still dark where my trembling fingers had brushed against it earlier. I could see his signature at the bottom, proof enough that every secret I'd uncovered wasn't stolen. It was surrendered. One of them, the chairwoman, spoke first. "You accessed restricted materials without authorization. That violates internal ethics protocol." "I accessed the truth," I said softly. "If you're calling it restricted, that's the problem." A low murmur passed between them. Pages turned, pens scratched. The echo of each sound filled the space between us, heavy and rehearsed. My ally from the legal department, a quiet man named Paul, sat beside me. He'd been assigned as a neutral observer, but I knew his sympathies leaned toward justice, even if he couldn't say it aloud. When the chairwoman pressed again, "Do you admit to collecting private documents from a secured database?" He shifted slightly, clearing his throat. "The database in question was linked to her own employment record," he said. "She had clearance for at least part of the material." The board member to her right frowned. "Partial clearance doesn't justify full access." Paul met his gaze. "Neither does fraud justify silence." The room went still. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to hesitate. They turned their attention back to me. "You claim these documents were evidence of misconduct. Do you have any verification of your claims?" I slid the folder forward. The board seal caught the light. "Reference ID LC09F, I said, my voice steady. "Expense reports, signed and submitted under his name. Cross-check them with the company's external vendor records. You'll find the same transfers repeated under a secondary account." The chairwoman flipped through the pages. The faint scent of polish thickened, the kind that hides decay beneath shine. "You understand, Ms. Hart," she said, her tone softening but her eyes hard, "that pursuing this matter may have consequences. Your position, your pension, everything you've earned could be at risk." "Then let the truth bankrupt me," I answered. The words left my mouth before I could second-guess them. For a brief moment, even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. Paul exhaled quietly beside me. It was the only sound of human approval I'd heard in weeks. The chairwoman leaned back. "You're aware he has filed a counterclaim, accusing you of defamation and professional misconduct?" I nodded. "He's weaponizing procedure to protect deceit. That's not defense, it's desperation." One of the men shifted his papers. "Be careful how you frame this, Ms. Hart. We're here to review ethics, not vengeance." "I'm not seeking vengeance," I said. "I'm seeking record correction." For a while, there was only the soft tap of a pen against the table. Then the chairwoman asked quietly, "What made you pursue this at all? Why not walk away?" I looked at the board seal embossed on the table, tracing it with my eyes. "Because if I walk away, truth becomes optional. And once it's optional, it dies." She didn't respond. Instead, she closed the folder and whispered something to the clerk at her side. The faint sound of a gavel striking wood followed, a single, muted beat. "We'll adjourn for 10 minutes, she announced. Paul leaned closer as they stepped out. "You may have gone too far with that last line." "Too far for them," I said. "Exactly far enough for me." He shook his head, a small, rueful smile. "You might lose everything." "Maybe, but I've already lost the illusion of safety. That's harder to rebuild." When the board returned, the atmosphere had changed. The chairwoman's tone was cooler, decisive. "We have reviewed the immediate evidence. Based on document reference LC09F and verified expenditure data, we're suspending the license of the respondent pending full inquiry. I froze. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misheard. You're suspending his license? Her gaze met mine. Effective immediately. We expect full cooperation from both parties. As for you, Ms. Hart, this panel will review your access privileges, but will not impose further disciplinary action at this time. Paul leaned back, relief softening the edges of his composure. As I gathered my papers, the scent of varnish seemed sharper, less suffocating now, as if the room itself had exhaled. Outside, the corridor lights flickered in their usual tired rhythm, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped beneath them. Justice, even partial, had weight, and it was beginning to shift. They suspended his license instead. Someone fed the papers before I could speak. The morning air was sharp with the sound of shutters clicking, a rhythm that replaced the heartbeat of the quiet neighborhood I once trusted. Light bled through the curtains, cold, relentless. I didn't need to open the window to know my life had been printed and delivered to every doorstep in the city. On the table, the newspaper lay folded to the headline, "Internal Scandal Exposes Hidden Affairs of Senior Partner." My name was in the subheading, stripped of privacy, stripped of dignity. The words were a mirror, cracked and selective, showing only the pieces they could profit from. I picked it up, fingers trembling slightly. The paper felt thin, but its weight was unbearable. "Anonymous family sources," it read. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't said a single word to anyone beyond the boardroom walls. Yet somehow the narrative had already been written, crafted, polished, weaponized. The camera flashes outside pulsed against the window, their glare slicing through the blinds. Every burst of light felt like a question I hadn't been given a chance to answer. I stepped back, my reflection fractured by the glass. The echo of each flash, click, silence, click, was a countdown to ruin. My phone buzzed once, a message from my ally, the same colleague who had helped verify the financial records. "It came from his firm," she wrote. "Their PR head leaked it. Confirmed off record." I stared at the text, unable to move for a moment. He'd done it himself, or at least sanctioned it. A preemptive strike to make sure the story hit first, painting him as the misunderstood victim, me as the vengeful wife. The television flickered in the background, the anchor's voice clinical. "The whistleblower has not been identified. Legal experts suggest internal retaliation is possible." My image flashed briefly on the screen, a photo from a company retreat, my smile too genuine for the sentence that followed. I turned it off. Silence was kinder. Outside, a reporter shouted, "My name." Another yelled, "Do you deny the allegations?" I pressed my palms against the cool surface of the table, the ink from the newspaper smudging beneath my touch. Every letter felt like it had been carved into my skin. I thought of the promise I'd made to myself weeks earlier, to protect the truth, no matter the cost. But this wasn't protection. This was exposure, raw and merciless. The world wasn't interested in justice. It wanted spectacle. By noon, the street was a gallery of strangers. Microphones, cameras, curious neighbors pretending not to stare. My ally called again, her tone cautious. "They're framing you," she said. "He's feeding them quotes through intermediaries, calling you unstable, vindictive. I can trace the source chain if you want, but—" I interrupted. "No, let them talk. Words can't destroy what they never built." She hesitated. "That's not how the press works. Once the story breathes, it grows teeth." I ended the call. She was right, of course, but I had no energy left for damage control. I walked to the mirror near the hallway and studied my face. The light from outside caught the edge of the glass, harsh and uneven. My reflection looked both older and stronger, someone tempered by fire she hadn't chosen. The phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it buzz once, twice, then answered. "Mrs. Hart?" a male voice asked. "This is Colin from The Herald. We'd like to confirm a few details before tomorrow's follow-up." I closed my eyes. "There are no details left," I said. "You've printed the corpse of a story. All that's left is noise." He tried again. "Off record, "Do you have any comment about the alleged retaliation hearing?" "I have proof," I said, "but not for you." Then I hung up. The house fell quiet again. The ticking of the wall clock felt like a reminder that time keeps its own loyalties. It doesn't stop for humiliation. I walked to the window and opened the blinds. The sudden brightness stung my eyes, but I didn't flinch. If the world wanted a show, I wouldn't hide behind shadows anymore. Across the street, a woman held up her phone to film. Her lens caught the sunlight, a white flare against my vision. It looked like judgment made visible. For a long while, I stood there and let the noise fade into the distance. The reporters eventually left. The light dimmed with evening. The house smelled faintly of cold coffee and ink. I thought of him, how easily he'd erased decades of truth with one leak. I knew he'd call eventually. Guilt always demands an audience. I waited until night settled, until the outside world turned from spectacle to silence. Then the phone rang again. This time, it was his voice. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if I was all right. He said, "You did this." They came with gloves, not judgment. The knock was measured. 3 soft taps against the front. Door, no hostility, only procedure. I opened it to find 2 officers standing beneath the pale morning light, their faces unreadable, their presence carrying the quiet authority of consequence. One of them held a folder stamped with the court seal. "Search warrant," he said gently, handing it to me. His tone wasn't cruel. It was deliberate, professional. The air smelled faintly of rain and paper ink, the scent that always seemed to follow bureaucracy. I stepped aside. "You'll find what you're looking for in the study," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, detached, as though I were narrating someone else's morning. The officers entered, their gloved hands brushing past the edges of furniture, leaving no trace but a faint whisper of latex against wood. The sound was almost reverent, like a chapel where silence itself carried weight. My ally from the legal office, the same gatekeeper who'd once slipped me copies of account ledgers, supervised the process. She checked each item against the list, her expression focused, her pen steady. "Every drawer, every locked cabinet," she told them. "Document everything." One officer nodded, kneeling beside the oak dresser. The drawer resisted at first, its handle trembling under pressure before sliding open. Inside, I saw a flicker of the past. Old receipts, keys, folded envelopes. My pulse stayed calm, but the texture of the moment was unbearable. The gloves brushed against paper that had once held love letters, now relics of deceit. "He used this room a lot?" one asked. "Every evening," I said. "He'd call it paperwork." The officer paused. "You did right, you know," he murmured, almost to himself. "Not everyone has the courage to bring truth into light." I didn't reply. Courage wasn't what I felt. It was more like exhaustion wearing a mask of purpose. Outside, I could sense neighbors gathering. Curtains shifted, voices whispered. They weren't hostile, just curious. Public empathy always arrived too late, like a guest who missed the storm but showed up to view the wreckage. Inside, the drawers continued to open and close, one after another, each thud sounding like a small confession forced into daylight. The room changed tone with every discovery. The echo of the drawer handles striking the wood became rhythmic, like heartbeats counting down the distance between past and justice. My ally scribbled something in her notebook. "We'll need to seal these files," she said, holding up a document folder with the label nearly worn off. Her gloved thumb brushed the spine. The ink had smudged years ago, but I recognized his handwriting. "Keep it separate," I said quietly. "That one matters." She nodded, marking it as reference K-17. The lead officer moved toward the small cabinet near the window. He pulled a key from his pocket, the spare I'd given them earlier, and inserted it slowly. The lock echoed louder than expected. When the drawer opened, the air shifted, like a held breath finally released. Inside was a single black folder. No dust, no disorder, just intention. He lifted it carefully. The gloves crinkled faintly as he placed it on the desk. My ally leaned over, adjusting her glasses. The label was printed in crisp, bold letters. Trust. No other markings, no subfolders, just that word, clean, ironic, and cruel. The officer looked at me. "You want to see this?" I hesitated. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I could handle another truth spelled out in ink, but silence had cost too much already. "Open it," I said. He flipped the cover. The papers inside were pristine. Contracts, transfers, notarized letters. Every one of them signed with the same hand that used to hold mine across the dinner table. "Accounts in joint custody," my ally whispered. He moved assets out of shared holdings 6 months before the inquiry. The officer's pen scratched softly as he logged each item. "Evidence chain intact," he said. I felt the weight of the folder's name sink into me. Trust. The one word that had built our life now filed under proof of its undoing. The officer sealed it in a transparent bag, pressing the tape across the edge until it was airtight. I watched his hands, the slow precision of someone accustomed to handling fragility, whether objects or people. When they were done, I thanked them. Not because it was polite, but because I needed to say something human before the silence swallowed me again. Outside, the wind had picked up. The faint rustle of leaves scraped against the porch railing. The house felt lighter, emptied of its secrets, yet heavier with what they'd left behind. As the officers carried the evidence boxes out, one turned back. "You've done more than most," he said softly. "Truth always costs something." "I know," I replied, "but I didn't expect the receipt to come stamped, 'Trust.'" He gave a faint, knowing smile and stepped into the gray light. The door shut behind them. The sound echoed through the hallway, long and hollow, and there it was, still on the desk, still burning its word into the air. They found another file, labeled Trust. Her handwriting was too steady for someone betrayed. Each curve of the letters carried restraint, not anger, the kind of composure that doesn't belong to youth. The envelope had no return address, only my name written with deliberate care. When I opened it, the scent of lavender rose from the paper, faint but piercing, like a memory I never consented to keep. Inside was a single page, no greeting, no sign of hesitation. "I didn't ask to exist in this lie," she wrote. "But I can't pretend it doesn't define me." The words blurred for a second. I wasn't crying, not exactly. It was more like the body refusing to accept the shape of truth. The pen she used left a small indentation where she must have pressed too hard, a visible heartbeat frozen in ink. I folded the letter once, then again, before placing it on the table. The bracelet I'd found months earlier, the one he claimed belonged to a client, glimmered beside it. It caught the morning light like a quiet confession. I remembered seeing it on her wrist in a photo once, the same silver loop that now rested under my roof. Some objects never stop accusing. By afternoon, I carried the letter to the counselor I'd been seeing since the inquiry began. She was the only person who spoke to me without agenda. Her office smelled faintly of eucalyptus and books, the kind of space that tried to convince you healing was a profession. She read the letter silently, eyes scanning line by line. When she finished, she placed it gently on her desk. "She's not attacking you," she said softly. "She's asking where the adults were when truth needed defending." "She's asking the wrong person," I said. "I wasn't the one who built the lie." "Maybe," she replied, "but you're the only one still standing in its ruins." I didn't respond. Her words lingered longer than I wanted them to. I looked down at the bracelet again, tracing its edge between my fingers. "Do you believe forgiveness is the same as surrender?" The counselor shook her head. "Forgiveness is when you stop carrying what he made you hold. Surrender is when you let it define you." I almost laughed. Then I suppose I'm somewhere in between. Outside her window, rain had started to fall, a steady rhythm against the glass. I wondered if the girl was somewhere watching the same storm. The lavender scent on the letter hadn't faded. It clung stubbornly, like her need to be understood. I thought about writing back, but what would I say? I'm sorry for every adult who lied to you. I'm sorry your existence was turned into proof. There are no words that fit inside a wound shaped by others. When I left the counselor's office, I walked home through the drizzle. The city smelled like wet concrete and distance. At a crosswalk, I paused beside a newsstand. The same newspaper that once printed my humiliation now carried a smaller headline. Partner's suspension extended pending investigation. Justice moved slowly, but it moved. That night, I sat by the window with the letter unfolded beside me. I read it again under the low lamp, tracing her words as if they might reveal something I'd missed. Her tone wasn't cruel, it was weary, almost adult. I just need to know who I am, she'd written near the end. I understood that line too well. Identity built on deceit always collapses under its own weight. The irony was cruel. She was innocent, yet born into consequence. I wanted to tell her that truth, once uncovered, doesn't repair what it destroys. It simply refuses to let the damage keep pretending it's whole. The phone buzzed once, my ally from the legal office checking in. I ignored it. Some conversations needed silence more than strategy. I folded the letter again, this time more gently, smoothing the creases with my palm. Then I slipped it into a small box where I kept fragments that once defined my life. Photographs, receipts, a house key no longer useful. The bracelet went in last. Before closing, he sued me for defamation. The words sat heavy at the top of the page, printed in precise black letters that smelled faintly of ink and finality. I'd expected retaliation, but not this. An official notice wrapped in arrogance and delivered through the mail slot like a taunt. The envelope bore the court seal, and for a moment I just stared at it, listening to the silence between the ticking seconds. The courthouse loomed gray and impassive under the morning light. As I stepped inside, the sound of my heels on marble echoed too loudly, every footstep announcing my unwilling role in his theater of denial. The air inside carried that familiar chill, disinfectant, old paper, polished floors. It was the scent of bureaucracy and buried truths. I handed the summons to my ally, the court-appointed defender who'd become my unexpected anchor through this. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages with quiet precision. "He's claiming malicious intent," he said finally. "Says your reports damaged his career and reputation." I couldn't help but laugh once, hollowly. He ruined his own reputation. I just refused to help him hide it. He nodded, sliding the papers back into the file. "The claim's weak. Emotional posturing. Still, we'll have to respond formally." The courthouse clock struck once, its deep metallic sound rolling through the hall. It matched the rhythm of my pulse, steady, deliberate, defiant. The hands on that clock hadn't moved in years, yet someone had wound it again recently. Time itself seemed to demand that this story finally be told in daylight. We walked toward the courtroom to file our motion. "We'll counter with a demand for full financial disclosure," my ally said. "If he's lying, that paper trail will bleed through fast." "Do it," I said. My voice felt stronger than I expected. "Let the truth bankrupt the story he built." He hesitated for a beat. "You understand this will go public, right? No sealed records. Journalists, maybe cameras." "I've lived in shadows long enough," I replied. "Let them watch. Let them see who he really is." At the filing desk, I signed the counter motion. The pen scratched against the form, a sound small enough to vanish under the ticking above, yet somehow louder in its consequence. Every line I signed was a return of power he thought he'd taken. When we stepped back into the hallway, he was there, waiting. Standing just beyond the pillars, pretending not to have timed it perfectly. He smiled, thin and rehearsed. "Still chasing ghosts?" "No," I said steady. "Just collecting receipts." His jaw tightened. "You've humiliated me enough. This will end badly for you." I tilted my head slightly. "You mean legally or emotionally? Because either way, I've survived worse." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this is justice? It's obsession. And you think hiding behind lawyers makes you innocent?" His silence was louder than any argument. For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind his composure. Quick, human, undeniable. The sound of the courthouse clock broke between us again. 1 second, then another. My ally stepped forward. "That's enough. The case will be handled in court." He turned and walked away, but his words lingered like residue. I looked up at the clock above the archway. Its second hand trembled near the 12, ticking with quiet authority. Every lie has a timestamp, I thought. His were about to expire. Outside, the sunlight had shifted. Reporters waited near the steps, their microphones angled like weapons disguised as questions. The air buzzed faintly with the sound of traffic, paper shuffling, anticipation. My ally handed me a copy of the filed motion. "The judge reviewed it immediately," he said. "You got your wish? Open hearing." "When?" He looked at the document again, then met my eyes. "Friday." I felt the words land inside me like the click of a lock turning. Everything that had lived in whispers was about to speak in daylight. The courthouse clock chimed again, slow and resonant. Court set for Friday, open session. Crowds crave confession more than truth. The courtroom was full before the clock even struck 9. Reporters, spectators, former colleagues, everyone who'd whispered rumors, now came to see which would live and which would die under oath. The air shimmered with a low hum of anticipation, broken only by the sharp clicks of camera shutters. When I walked to the witness bench, I didn't feel brave, just ready. The microphone in front of me gleamed beneath the overhead light, its thin silver arm angled like an interrogation. The sound of the judge's gavel cracked through the noise, 3 sharp hits that echoed off marble and memory alike. I raised my hand, swore the oath, and sat down. The ceiling lights buzzed faintly, steady, unrelenting, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. My lawyer handed me the first folder. "Take your time," he said softly. "Clarity over speed." So I began. "On March 3rd, I said, the first reimbursement slip was forged. 2 months later, the department budget reflected a shortfall of exactly $42,000. Every discrepancy traced back to one signature." A rustle moved through the gallery, quick and human, as if everyone had exhaled at once. I saw him sitting 2 rows behind the defense table, shoulders taut, eyes fixed on the floor. He wouldn't look at me. The journalist seated near the aisle typed fast, the steady rhythm of her keystrokes keeping pace with my pulse. She was my silent ally, the only one documenting not just words, but truth in real time. When I paused, she nodded once, not in pity, but in solidarity. The prosecutor asked, "Did you personally witness the transactions being signed?" "No," I said, "but I kept copies, every form, every ledger." He nodded. "And these were submitted as evidence?" "Yes, under File 12-76. The judge leaned forward. "That corresponds with the written notice of submission, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, dated 3 weeks ago." He scribbled something, then looked toward the defense table. "Acknowledged." The defense attorney rose, smooth and rehearsed. "So," he began, pacing slowly, "you've been keeping records of your husband's work." A few gasps broke the quiet, quickly hushed by the bailiff's glare. I answered carefully. "I was keeping records of my employer's transactions." He smiled, thin and cutting. "Employer, husband, it's a fine line, isn't it?" The judge's gavel came down once. "Watch your tone, counselor." But the damage had landed. The crowd loved discomfort. It gave them something to feel without risk. I steadied my breath. "The line," I said quietly, "was the difference between truth and comfort. I chose truth." The journalist's fingers paused. She glanced at me again, just long enough to let me know the words would live beyond the room. Outside the windows, sunlight flashed against camera lenses. The light reflected off marble pillars, bouncing across the courtroom like accusation made visible. Every gleam seemed to carry my voice outward, to the headlines waiting beyond those doors. The defense pressed harder. "You're saying he committed fraud deliberately?" "I'm saying," I replied, "he used the system's trust to feed his own fear, and when I refused to lie, he made me his scapegoat." He scoffed. "You call this justice?" "No," I said. "I call it daylight." The clock above the bench ticked loud in the silence that followed. For a moment, I thought even time was listening. The prosecutor stepped forward again. "Your Honor, we request to enter the ledger extracts and supporting correspondence as proof." "Granted," said the judge. "Mark the entries for review." He looked at me then, expression unreadable, but not unkind. "You may step down, Mrs." He caught himself, correcting gently. "You may step down." I gathered the folders, each page warm beneath the lights, as if truth itself carried heat. My ally in the gallery lowered her camera, whispering something to the reporter beside her. I caught the words only faintly. She didn't flinch. When I turned to leave, he finally lifted his gaze. His eyes met mine for the first time in months. There was no shame, only warning. He leaned forward, lips barely moving, the courtroom noise swallowing the words for everyone but me. He whispered, "You'll regret daylight." His lawyer called me vindictive. I called it memory. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, clinging, impossible to ignore. He wanted to paint me as bitter, vengeful, unstable, but I'd come armed with something far quieter. Truth written in ink, truth sealed in time. The courtroom was brighter that morning, the ceiling lights buzzing faintly, as if the room itself anticipated combustion. The sound of the stenographer's keys began before the questioning did, that steady mechanical rhythm clicking like a metronome for truth. My ally sat to her right, confirming each notation, ensuring every word found permanence in the record. The opposing lawyer circled me with words sharper than tone could hide. "You admit you accessed his private correspondence, yes?" "I accessed company records," I replied. "Not private, registered under the joint domain." He smiled thinly. "So you're redefining privacy?" "I'm defining accountability." The gallery stirred. The crowd always loved a duel dressed in civility. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You had a choice, didn't you? To forgive." Forgive. The word echoed like a bell from another life. I breathed once before answering. "I had a duty to the truth. Forgiveness doesn't erase fraud." He flinched, just slightly. The stenographer's clicking grew faster, capturing each syllable, each tremor. The sound filled the silence between our breaths, a rhythm of proof. He adjusted his cufflinks, feigning calm. "And yet, you chose publicity over privacy. You made this spectacle." "No," I said quietly. "He made the mess. I just stopped cleaning it." The judge's eyes lifted briefly, warning him to tread carefully. But he didn't. "Tell me," he said, pacing now, "did you ever love him?" Gasps rippled through the gallery. The question wasn't legal. It was venom dressed as curiosity. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. "Once," I said, "before truth became something he edited." The murmurs deepened. Somewhere behind me, a camera shutter snapped, proof that humiliation sells better than honesty. The stenographer's hands never stopped. Every word became immortal, logged, time-stamped. The sound of typing replaced my heartbeat. He slammed another exhibit on the table. Emails, highlighted, underlined, a desperate display. "Explain this," he demanded. "You accuse him of falsifying reports, yet here you say, and I quote, 'I still want to believe you.'" I looked down at the page. My handwriting, my weakness, preserved. "I wrote that," I said, "because belief was cheaper than betrayal back then. But the numbers didn't lie. He did." A few people clapped before the bailiff hushed them. The lawyer's jaw tightened. His control was slipping, the crowd leaning toward the truth they once doubted. He turned, pointing. "You're performing." I shook my head. "No, you just didn't expect the audience to believe me." For a moment, silence took over. Real silence. Thick, raw, fragile. I could almost feel it vibrate in the floor. My ally gave a small nod, confirming the record was intact, every word saved, every pause documented. He tried one last jab. "You wanted his downfall." "I wanted his honesty," I said. "But he left that long before I did." The judge raised a hand. "Counsel, enough." The lawyer hesitated, chest rising with something halfway between rage and disbelief. "Your Honor." "Enough," the judge repeated, louder. "This is cross-examination, not theater." He sat down hard, defeated in posture if not yet in pride. The stenographer's keys slowed. The echo of the courtroom softened into human breath again. I caught sight of the exhibit tag on the table. Faded ink, torn corner, but still legible. Evidence ages, I thought. Memory doesn't. The judge leaned back. "We'll resume shortly," he said, his tone even but tired. The gavel struck once, then twice. The sharp sound rolled through the gallery like thunder breaking glass. The crowd erupted in whispers, questions, opinions, disbelief. But I stayed still, hands folded, eyes fixed on the bench. The air trembled with aftershock. Truth didn't need defense. It just needed to outlast the noise. The judge called for recess. When he stood, I almost pitied him. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than usual, thick with the weight of expectation and consequence. The light from the tall windows sliced through the dust, landing squarely on the spot where he stood. For months, that room had been a battlefield. Now it was an altar for truth. The judge's voice carried across the silence. "Guilty," he said, pausing as if the word needed to breathe. "Guilty of fraud and concealment of assets." The words didn't echo. They landed. Solid, irrevocable. He didn't flinch, not even as the crowd stirred in a collective sigh of vindication. I could see the faint tremor in his hand, the way his jaw clenched beneath composure. The folder before him remained closed, its edges worn from being touched too often and understood too late. The judge continued. "All withheld accounts are to be liquidated. Pension benefits reinstated in full." A quiet ripple of approval spread through the gallery. My ally beside me, the arbiter who'd seen every document, exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. I just nodded, unable to find words. The light on the judge's bench flickered slightly, a reminder that even institutions tremble before justice lands. The gavel struck once. A sound, sharp enough to slice through history. It was over. For a moment, I stared at the document in front of me, the final judgment order marked with my case number and the court's insignia. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust, the scent of closure. Years of silence, humiliation, accusation, all condensed into a few paragraphs of formal language that could finally be filed, folded, and left behind. He turned slightly, perhaps expecting me to look away first. I didn't. I studied the man who once held my future in his hands, now reduced to a defendant waiting for instructions. There was no hatred left in me, only the quiet recognition that some endings are earned line by line. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" the judge asked. His lawyer whispered something, but he shook his head. "No, Your Honor," he said softly, his voice barely audible. The clerk recorded it in the transcript. The stenographer's keys clicked once more, sealing the moment forever in the public record. The judge signed the final page. "The court stands adjourned." The gavel fell again, 2 quick strikes this time. The sound reverberated against the walls, bouncing through memory, through years of denial, through every door that had been slammed in my face. I felt my pulse slow, my breath steady. Justice wasn't glorious. It was calm. It arrived without fanfare, without applause, just a quiet shift in air pressure that said, "You were right to endure." As the room emptied, the crowd's murmurs blurred into background noise. Some offered congratulations. Others simply nodded, their expressions a blend of relief and curiosity. The journalist from earlier scribbled notes, perhaps searching for one last quote. But I had nothing to offer except silence. I gathered my folder, the same one I'd carried since the first hearing. Its corners bent, its papers marked by fingerprints and years of disbelief. It felt lighter now, not because it held less, but because the burden inside it had finally been seen. Outside the courtroom, sunlight poured across the marble floor. It was brighter than before, honest and unfiltered. I paused at the threshold, letting the light wash over me. My reflection in the glass doors looked older, yes, but also cleaner, like the truth had finally rinsed away everything false. Behind me, the bailiff instructed him to wait for the paperwork. His lawyer gathered documents hurriedly, eyes fixed anywhere but mine. I turned once, just once. He stood near the defense table, head lowered, hands clasped, as if prayer might rewrite the verdict. But no prayer could. No denial could. Our eyes met for the last time, his full of regret, mine of release. He didn't look back. Peace is louder when rooms remember pain. The house had grown too quiet to lie anymore. I sat in the living room, the lamp's amber glow trembling against the old photograph, the one taken before everything, fractured. Our smiles, once effortless, now looked like signatures forged under pressure. The faint hum of the bulb mixed with the distant ticking of a clock I hadn't wound in weeks. Time had stopped when the truth arrived. The therapist's note rested beside me on the table, folded neatly, edges softened from rereading. It said, "Closure isn't silence, it's space." I ran my thumb across the ink, tracing every loop and pause in her handwriting, as if her words could make sense of the ruins around me. The scent of wax drifted through the room, warm, faint, almost kind. The light landed on the shelves where we once kept books, cards, receipts, artifacts of ordinary life pretending to be whole. I started sorting them, one at a time. A letter opener engraved with our initials, a chipped mug he never threw away, a framed note from our daughter, her handwriting careful, sincere, before she learned the cost of loyalty. I spoke to the empty air. "You kept the house clean," I murmured, "but you let the truth rot." The echo answered back softer than my own voice. I picked up the therapist's note again. Space. The word clung to me. Not absence. Permission. Permission to breathe without defending every inhale. There was a list on my lap, written in black pen. Things to give away, things to keep, things to finally burn. I crossed out letters and wrote, "Return unopened." The act felt small but right, like cutting a thread without breaking the fabric. The lamp flickered once, its filament pulsing amber against the photograph. His face looked almost kind again under that light. Almost. My chest tightened, not from longing but from relief. I didn't have to hate him anymore to be free of him. Outside, wind pressed softly against the window panes. Somewhere down the street, a car door closed, and footsteps faded into distance. I thought about how many nights I'd waited for that sound, his return, his key, his lie rehearsed between breaths. Now, silence arrived like mercy. I walked to the hallway where the mirror hung crooked. My reflection caught me mid-step, eyes lined but steady. For the first time in years, I didn't look like someone waiting to be believed. The scent of wax grew stronger as I carried the candle to the kitchen counter. Light pooled over the old tile, touching the therapist's note, the photograph, the keys I no longer needed. I realized the lamp's glow didn't make the house less empty. It just made the emptiness visible. I spoke once more quietly. "It's done." I took a final look at the photograph, then set it face down. The air changed. The house exhaled. Peace didn't announce itself. It crept in like dawn, pale and real, laying gentle across everything that remained. I turned off the lamp. I wrote her a truth gentler than the one I lived. The pen felt heavier than any verdict, any silence, any fight. I'd rehearsed the words in my mind for days, but when the page lay open before me, blank and waiting, I realized there was no easy way to tell a child that the love she was born from also broke everything around it. The envelope waited beside the candle, its unbroken seal watching me like an unspoken promise. My ally, the counselor, sat across from me, quiet, patient, her eyes steady but kind. "Say it how you'd want to be remembered," she'd told me earlier. So I began. "Dear one," I wrote, the ink spreading slightly with each stroke. "He failed us both. But you must know, failure doesn't erase what was once true. It only asks us to choose differently." The candlelight flickered across the table, shadows folding over the lines I'd already written. The scent of melted wax curled through the air, faint and comforting, like memory stripped of its sting. I paused, pressing my palm against the paper, as if warmth could make honesty softer. "You'll read things about us," I continued, "some loud, some cruel. Believe what matches kindness, not convenience." I looked at the counselor, and she nodded. "Keep going," she whispered. I hesitated, then wrote, "He lied to protect his image. I stayed silent to protect yours. Both were mistakes." The pen scratched again, slow, deliberate. Each sentence felt like a confession, disguised as guidance. I didn't want to hand her pain. I wanted to hand her a map through it. There was a moment when my hand shook. I stared at the words, the ink trembling. I thought of her laugh when she was 5, the way she used to run into the room holding drawings, 2 stick figures holding hands under a sun too big for the page. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" I asked softly. The counselor leaned forward. "She doesn't have to yet. You're giving her the chance to." I nodded, breathing through the ache in my chest. "Then it's enough." I wrote the last paragraph carefully. "We can't rewrite what broke us, but we can choose truth over inheritance, and that's what love looks like when it grows up." When I reached the end, I didn't ask for a reply. I didn't ask for her to understand. I just wanted the letter to reach her hands without bitterness riding beside it. The candle leaned low, its light trembling, reflecting off the sealed envelope now resting in my palm. The wax seal felt warm when I pressed it closed, like a quiet heartbeat. I whispered, almost to the air itself, "You'll have your story now. Not mine, yours." Outside, a breeze slipped against the window pane, soft and forgiving. The shadows in the room shifted, not darker, just quieter. The counselor stood, touched my shoulder once, and said, "You did what was right." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need affirmation. I placed the letter inside a plain folder marked only with her name. No return address, no plea, just truth, folded neatly between past and possibility. Candle's flame steadied, no longer flickering, its light holding firm against the silence. The candle burned steady this time. The file came back, stamped closed, permanent. The words looked final, but they didn't feel cruel. They felt earned. The clerk's voice over the phone was calm, almost gentle. "Your case has been archived," she said. "All documents verified, all orders fulfilled." I thanked her, though the call lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes to end a decade of noise. When I hung up, the house was still. Morning light slipped through the blinds, gold and unhurried, spilling across the table where I'd once sorted papers through tears and disbelief. Now the table held only 2 things, the envelope with the court seal and the small ring I'd worn the day he left. I opened the envelope carefully, fingertips brushing against the embossed letterhead. Inside lay a single page, a record stamped, catalogued, boxed, and filed away forever. My life had once been reduced to that file, every accusation, every defense, every statement typed in neat, detached font. Now it was returning not as burden, but as proof that survival had been documented. The light touched the page again, its reflection catching on the ink. I thought about the first day I'd walked into that courthouse, shoulders tense, voice shaking, afraid that truth wouldn't matter. Back then, he said the file was closed, as if silence could overwrite what was written. But truth doesn't vanish when buried. It waits for witnesses. I reached for the ring, holding it between my thumb and forefinger. It had dulled over time, the metal worn smooth, almost faceless. Once it meant promise. Later, it meant proof. Now it was simply an artifact, part of the same archive, another item ready for peace. The scent of morning coffee drifted from the kitchen, grounding me in the present. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the pauses that once belonged to arguments. Even the silence here had changed texture. It was no longer heavy. It was clean. I laid the court receipt beside the ring and traced the printed date with my nail. Closure wasn't a ceremony. It was a quiet alignment of everything that had once been torn apart. I thought of her, the girl who'd received my letter. Maybe she'd read it by now. Maybe she'd placed it in a drawer, or burned it, or kept it close. Whatever she chose, it didn't matter anymore. The truth had reached her, as it had reached me. Outside, a new day was rising. The sunlight stretched across the floorboards, climbing toward the shelves that once held evidence. Now they carried books, framed notes, ordinary things. Life had found its shape again, modest but unbreakable. The clerk's words replayed in my mind. Archived. It meant finished, yes, but also preserved. My story was no longer in his hands, or the court's. It existed as record, not as wound. I exhaled, long and slow. "You see?" I whispered to the empty room. "It didn't end with him." The light brightened, spilling across the file one last time. The truth survived me.